In 1950, the U.S. economy did not depend much on natural resources imported from abroad. In fact, most of the oil we consumed, we produced at home. Today, we are critically dependent not only on imported energy, but on other critical materials for the U.S. economy as well. The low level of economic integration of the United States with the rest of the world after World War II freed U.S. policymakers to pursue strategic and ideological goals without undue concern for the economic consequences. Our leaders worried about opportunities for investment overseas and about the supply of some raw materials needed for military purposes like tin and uranium, but they did not believe that a foreign policy that aggressively projected U.S. power around the world could damage the U.S. economy. It was this activist legacy that the Bush 43, George W. Bush administration, understandably turned to after 9/11. Critics of the Bush era seem to have concluded that preemptive invasions, unilateral bullying, muscle-bound interventions, torture and abuse of opponents, contempt for international law and institutions, and the like, were either unprecedented in themselves or executed with unprecedented intensity and clumsiness over the 8 years of the Bush administration. The historical record suggests, on the contrary, that none of this was without ample precedent in the international behavior of the United States during the long Cold War. Though certainly not unprecedented, the unilateralism and reliance on military force and threats of military force of the Bush administration damaged U.S. interests around the globe, because the conditions that once insulated the United States from the consequences of such behavior had long since disappeared by the time George W. Bush was elected to the presidency. The unprecedented circumstances I refer to are the globalization of the U.S. economy, which I've already mentioned, and the growing and visible impact of climate change on the major portions of the globe. Globalization has dramatically narrowed the options available to U.S. policymakers in contrast to the Cold War era, because patterns of behavior that once had no impact on the U.S. economy now run the risk of damaging it, either because they conflict with the interests of economic partners on whom we depend, or because they tend to undermine international legal norms and institutions when our economy needs an even stronger and more effective global order, or because they damage the reputation of the United States in ways that make cooperating with us more difficult for politicians who take public opinion seriously in other countries. Moreover, damage to our economic interests is not the only cost of an overly aggressive and unilateralist foreign policy. Climate change is already affecting major portions of the earth and will soon threaten the United States as well. Confronting this challenge with any hope of success will require international cooperation on a scale we can only dimly imagine now, because so little has yet been done to meet it. This brings me to what I see, you may not agree, as the main foreign policy challenge for the Obama presidency and perhaps for his successors, subsequent presidents as well. The challenge is, how can the United States use its diminishing relative economic power and its momentarily outsized military capacity to save, but also simultaneously to reform, a liberal world order that has produced immense productivity gains and massively reduced poverty rates in so much of the globe over the past 3 decades. The recession is already making it difficult to contain protectionist impulses in wealthy countries. To go beyond merely fending off protectionism to creating more robust and effective international and global institutions may prove impossible. Yet in a wide variety of issue arenas, they are critically needed. from developing better macroeconomic policy coordination and healthier and more vigilant financial regulation, to organizing responses to global warming and its potentially catastrophic effects. Fortunately, and this too is unprecedented, the long-term interests of the United States and the rest of the global community are now more closely aligned, I believe, than ever before. We all need to strengthen the rule of law, the regulatory systems that protect our planet and ourselves from destruction, and the global institutions that can help us achieve these goals. What, you may ask, does all of this have to do with Latin America? This brings me to the second set of issues I would like to discuss with you. Two observations may help to draw the connection between the global trends I have discussed and U.S. policy in Latin America. First, Latin America is a region where the United States still wields great power and still has many friends. It may be easier to start by strengthening inter-American institutions than to tackle every major issue at the global level. And second, there's a lot to be done. The present condition of interstate and transnational relations in the Western Hemisphere does not provide much evidence of intelligent design. The three stated goals of our Latin American policy are, first, to preserve peace and minimize potential threats to our security. Second, to raise living standards both at home and abroad through greater economic integration, including freer trade. And three, to promote human rights and democratic institutions. These goals are as worthwhile as they are practical. It would be wonderful if the government of the United States would pursue them in a reasonably coherent way. The Obama administration has been impeded in its efforts to do so by deep suspicion and outright obstruction in Congress. So before coming to a scorecard on how well Obama's been doing, I'm going to spend a minute or two on the problems he's facing. The most egregious example of these obstacles was the behavior of South Carolina's Republican Senator James Mint. He put a hold on the two key appointments needed to implement an Obama foreign policy in Latin America. The appointment of Arturo Valenzuela as Assistant Secretary of State for Inter-American Affairs, and the appointment of and the nomination of the sitting Assistant Secretary Thomas Shannon to the post of Ambassador to Brazil. And he held up these appointments until he could be sure that the United States would back off of its efforts in concert with other countries and every other country in the Western Hemisphere to restore constitutional government in Honduras. And when the United States backed off, he released his hold. The two men are now appointed to their positions, and Honduras has, a government elected under a de facto regime, and in opposition to most of the other countries in the hemisphere, and at the cost of weakening the OAS.